Okay, and this is always one of my favorite questions, and then somebody happened to ask this one. What was the biggest lesson learned in implementing RBM? If you had a chance to do what you did, if you could go back and do it all over again, is there anything you would have done differently knowing what you know now?
Yeah, that's a great question. And yeah, because you're always going to be surprised by something, right? So I think that I mentioned this already. People will go in the direction that you tell them to. So if you say it's important to get first patient in on, August 1st, people will move mountains to make sure that you get first patient in on August 1st. And if you tell them it's important to make sure that there is no patient enrolled in the study that violated inclusion or exclusion criteria, same thing. People will move mountains to make sure, because those are things that the organization is paying attention to. In a management structure, people, don't want to be dinged for the things that they have been told are important. So, that's one thing. So as leaders, again, you really have the ability to set the tone, to set your team in a direction where, they're focusing on what you have all agreed, right? Is the consensus, all agree that this is important and that you get that. So that is one thing that was very telling. People who had for years been focused on, one thing, you all of a sudden put it into a spreadsheet or a dashboard, and they are completely focused on that. I do have a little bit of an anecdote. When we implemented this large-scale system, one of the goals was to try to identify sites who would be potentially at risk for, a regulatory inspection, thinking that the regulatory bodies were doing something similar, using algorithms to try to, pull out data flags, and then focus on those sites to make sure that they were inspection ready, more so than sites that had metrics that didn't indicate that they had such issues. And so we spent a lot of time on those sort of high-risk sites. They came out, and it turns out none of them were inspected. So of course, now that doesn't mean that it wasn't a worthwhile exercise. Of course it was. But one of the things that happened during the course of the study was we did have a monitor on site, and was doing, very, typical source document review. And as you know, they have access to the patient's medical information. And she's at one site one day and goes to another site another day for a different study. And lo and behold, she remembers that she saw the same patient name for another study, and basically uncovered that it was a patient who had enrolled themselves into multiple studies at the same time. And, for me, that was a huge lesson learned, because there's no system that you could put in place to capture something like that. And so, as sophisticated as these things can be, and as helpful as they can be, again, you still cannot replace the value of, people being on site, your CRAs establishing relationships with your investigators. You just can't walk away from those things. You absolutely, need to take, again, a holistic approach. So those are probably the biggest lessons for me.